Good evening. Hi. All right. Good evening. Greetings, everyone. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I hope you are all doing well. Hello, hello. Oh, hi, hello. Okay, everybody's arriving. So I wait a minute. Okay, I think we can start. Greetings, good evening. I hope you are well. Let's continue. Actually, if you have any questions, you can also just ask now. Otherwise, I just continue with the text. I keep an eye on the chat, so if you have some questions, just ask. Otherwise, I continue with the text. So last time we finished stanza 22, which was a very important, I said, very important point was being made there, right? So basically saying that when we understand the teachings on emptiness, that all of these teachings on emptiness is very important to cut away the grasping at true existence and to understand the nature of delusion, actually. So there's few reasons why the teachings on emptiness are very important, either through like what is taught in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, or the way that is elaborated by Nagarjuna and others in the Madhyamika philosophical explanations and system. So either way, it's very important to cut beyond the four extremes. But as it says in the stanza 22, however, the mind is empty of all defilements, but it is not empty of its own luminous nature and qualities, right? So that was the point we kind of reached last time. Now, we're going to elaborate a bit more on this. So stanza 23, so point B 1.5, how the Dharmadhatu is not empty of wisdom and qualities, right? So now in stanza 23, it will basically explain in some more detail this important point that we just talked about before, that I just repeated again, and I repeat this many times. I like to repeat this very important point. Mind is empty of all defilements. Mind is empty, and it's empty. Mind is empty, and is also empty of all defilements, but it is not empty of the natural luminous nature and qualities. So, how is that? So, this stanza 23 says, just as water deep inside the earth lies untouched and perfectly clean, Just so can primordial awareness rest within affliction and remain completely free of any flaw. So, this stanza, there's a nuance here that we need to understand. So, because it may seem at the first glance, it may seem there is sort of just another example for similar to others we had before in the text, but there's a slight nuance here. So the way it's explaining here is it's like water, right? So in the sense that water being this, having these qualities that is clear, limpid, and this liquid nature, right? This moist, humid, liquid nature. That even if it's buried deep within the earth, if we extract the water, there is no need to produce that natural qualities. So the natural purity and limpidity, or if I can use the expression like the watery nature, like watery nature, this watery nature, the nature of water is liquid, it's moist. That which we call this watery nature. There's no need to produce that. Even though the rock is hard and it's solid and the water is buried totally under the rock, but it never loses the watery nature. This can also slightly be used as like in the classical example of the muddy water, that if the water is muddy, and if we let the muddy water become still and undisturbed, then gradually it will become clear by itself. So if we stir the water, it becomes muddy. But if we don't touch it and let it stand, then naturally, gradually, it becomes clear. And its clarity is natural, is the nature of the water itself. So this is to explain that the primordial awareness, or the clear, luminous nature of the primordial state, is free from any flaw and is naturally present together with these qualities aspect. It is naturally present within the Buddha mind. So there's this kind of nuance here in this example, that even though we take the rock out, the watery nature, you cannot take that out. You understand? That's the point of this example. You cannot take that out. You can take the rock away and then the water, you bring it out, but you cannot take the watery nature out of the water. So that's the point of this example. But in order to really clarify this point, we also need to talk about the defilements. We also need to talk about the antidotes, because the Dharmadhatu is empty of the defilements, but also of the antidotes. And that's the next stanza, because if we would say that the Dharmadhatu is not empty of the antidotes, we would have a problem there, which we will understand in a moment, why this is important to understand. So that's stanza 24. So B1.6, how the Dharmadhatu is empty of defilements and antidotes, both. So stanza 24, the Dharmadhatu, so the antidotes, what means the antidotes? Of course, the antidotes means the means of purification, right? So we speak about that which purifies, or how to purify these defilements. But the Dharmadhatu is empty of the defilements, but is also empty of the antidotes. There's quite a subtle point here, which we will explore comes next. So stanza 24 says, the Dharmadhatu is not the self. It is neither man nor woman either, and being beyond everything perceivable, just how could it be thought of as oneself? So the Dharmadhatu is not the self. It is neither man nor woman either, And being beyond everything perceivable, just how could it be thought of as oneself? So the point that this stanza now is making is, because after we explained the stanzas before this one, someone might develop this idea that this natural luminous mind or quality that is ever present, that it is like something truly existing, that is like some kind of permanent entity, like a self or a soul or something like that, something, a thing with substance of some kind, right? So because we say the Dharmadhatu is empty of the defilements and the antidotes, but it is not empty of its own luminous nature and qualities. Okay, so there is something there, like something, like some substance, some entity. And so now this stanza is necessary to correct that, because that's the thing, when we speak, it is, even if the view is perfect, it is very difficult to really convey that, especially the more we talk. I think I made a comment like that recently, right? The more we talk, the harder it is to keep the middle point, It is easy to keep the middle point if we just say one sentence. But if we start saying a lot of sentences, then we start to swing, into extreme positions. So sometimes there's always this need to say something and then to kind of correct. Too much to the right, too much. If it goes too much to the right, you need to go a little bit to the left, So this stanza now is necessary to correct a little bit that possible misunderstanding that the previous ones could create. So, where was I? Going left, going right. So we cannot, so the first line of the stanza says, the Dharmadhatu is not the self. So Nagarjuna here is saying, okay, but don't make, just because the Dharmadhatu is not empty of its own luminous natural qualities, it doesn't mean it's like a truly existing self. Okay, so that's the point of the first line of this stanza. So now that we have clarified that point, then Nagarjuna says clearly in this stanza that Dharmadhatu is not the self, it has no intrinsic existing nature as an entity. But he goes further to say that this Dharmadhatu is also not a sentient being. The Dharmadhatu is not a sentient being. He says he's neither a man nor a woman either. It is nothing that can be perceived as an object. It is nothing that can be perceived as an object. So it is not a self. So this Buddhahood, which is the total realization is Buddha nature when this element becomes manifested, it's not a sentient being. Okay, this is quite important to understand. A Buddha is not a sentient being. We call a man or a woman a human being, an animal, whatever. We call sentient beings. They have consciousness, the 8 consciousnesses, and so on. We call a sentient being. A Buddha is not a sentient being. Not a man, not a woman. So that's the point of that stanza. It's not a sentient being. So we cannot objectify that in any way. And then it says it is being beyond everything perceivable. So it is nothing that can be perceived as an object. So being beyond everything perceivable means it is not perceivable as an object. All of the phenomenal reality is perceivable as an object. you look at anything with the senses and you perceive as an object, being an object of the visual sense, an object of the hearing sense, being an object of the mental consciousness, a mental object, right? Being a physical sensation. So all of this phenomenal reality is perceivable as an object. But the Dharmadhatu is not something that you can perceive as you perceive any phenomenal object like this. So it is nothing that has grasping or object of grasping. So if there is no grasping, if there is no source of grasping, the subject that does the grasping, and if there is no object to grasp, it is not an entity. Do you understand? So it is not something that can be perceived. That's what it's saying in this verse. It is not an object of perception of a subject. So as a consequence of that, it cannot be established as an entity or a self. So if you look at this stanza, that's exactly what it is saying here. The Dharmadhatu is not the self. It's neither a man or a woman. It's not a sentient being. It is not something perceivable as an object. So how can it be thought of as myself or a oneself? It cannot. So we should not think of Buddha nature in terms of the manifesting aspect of Buddha nature as Buddha. It is not a sentient being. It is not like oneself. Like, I am Buddha. No, it doesn't exist such thing. It is beyond being a self. It is beyond being an entity. This is perhaps one of the points that I think is sometimes it's really confusing for people. It is this tendency to anthropomorphize Buddha, to make Buddha into an individual, into a kind of a being. Buddha is not a being. Okay? It is not like, super me, Superman or superwoman, whatever, It's not like, I'm human being, and then I develop, and now I become Buddha being. It's not like this. It is the end of being. And it is the arising of the totality, of the great expanse, of the Dharmadhatu. It's not really the best example, but it is okay. It's just as an example. It's not perfect for this case, but just more or less. It's not like, because there's this classical example we use sometimes of the ocean and the waves, right? That the wave thinks it's a wave, and the wave thinks itself as being a wave, as being an entity, a self-standing, I am a wave, I am a wave, and I have wave rights. I have wave rights, and I am this kind of wave, And then the wave becomes a spiritual practitioner of wave Buddhism, and then the wave becomes super wave, tsunami wave Buddha. It's not like this. It's the opposite. It's like now all of a sudden, the wave first thought, "Oh, I am very special wave. I am unique wave. I am standalone, standing wave. Here by myself, with my wave identity. And then all of a sudden realizes, actually, no, there's no such thing. It's just ocean. There is no such thing as wave identity. There's just ocean. And the wave falls back into the ocean. So when you understand, that's one way to understand this stanza is actually that, the Dharmadhatu is not the self. It's neither man nor woman. It is not something perceivable as an object, separate. So how can you think of it as self? It's the other way around. This collapse of this self, actually. Okay. All right. So that's stanza 24. It's quite important to correct a little bit so that the view doesn't become too kind of Otherwise, we become a little bit too extreme on the materialist side, what we call eternalist side. But then it continues. This is important. So then it continues. Stanza 25. Within all phenomena, all free of passion, male and female cannot be seen. For the sake of taming those that desire blinds, the terms like male and female are taught. So Nagarjuna here is trying to now approach this aspect between conventional and ultimate, and he's using these examples of like male and female as an example. This is just an example. So what's the point here? So if there is no entity to be found, because that's what we've just been saying, there is no entity to be found, then why do we keep talking about sentient beings all the time? We keep talking about sentient beings that experience karma, rebirth, and so on. And when we talk about these things, and from a conventional perspective, it happens like that. So here it is saying that within all that which is free from passion or free from desire and grasping, within that space that is free from grasping and desire, those things we call usually male, female, we cannot find that. We cannot see that anywhere. It doesn't exist. So what is free from, what is that? What is that is free from grasping? Right? So let's look at this. This stanza is a bit complicated. So the stanza says, within phenomena, all free of passion. So within phenomena, all free of passion, male and female cannot be seen. So within that which is free from grasping, male and female cannot be seen. So what is that which is free from grasping? Right? So that's the first stanza, first line. So what is that which is free from? What is he talking about? So that which is free from grasping is what we call the truth of cessation. So of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of cessation, nirvana. But not just that, also the fourth, the truth of the path, the Dharma. The truth of the path also is free from grasping, is what's called undefiled phenomena. The truth of the path is undefiled, is not a defilement. Because remember, we're talking about that which defile, these defilements that obscure the Buddha nature. The path is not a defilement, it is undefiled. And of course, the truth of cessation, nirvana, cessation also obviously, right, is undefiled. So those are the undefiled phenomena, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. So within this undefiled of the cessation, the nirvana, there is no discrimination. There is no such thing as discrimination. So from that perspective, the examples that are used here, like male, female, are mere designations. They are just examples of conventionally labeled entities, conventionally designated phenomena. In other words, even though from the perspective of the undefiled, which is the truth of cessation, and the authentic Dharma, which is pure and beyond concept, there are no such designations. But for the sake of communication, for the sake of benefiting sentient beings on the path at the conventional level, then we use these kind of conventional designations, and we speak of these kind of things. We speak of sentient beings, this kind of sentient being, that kind of sentient being, this is male, this is female, this is a cat, this is a dog. For the sake of communication and for the sake of benefiting sentient beings on the path, we use these conventional designations. But from the perspective of the undefiled, the truth of nirvana, the truth of cessation and the truth of the path, there is no such things. So basically here is just using this example of male and female to show how we can use these conventional designations in regards to appearing phenomena according to the way they appear, according to their nature. Actually, if you remember, we spoke a little bit about, quite a bit actually, about this in the Sword of Wisdom also, right? If you remember. The way designating phenomena according to their nature, in terms conventionally how they appear. However, from the real sense of the truth of cessation, these are mere designations. There is no such thing. The ultimate nature of the mind, the ultimate nature of reality, is neither a person, it's not a self, it is not male, it is not female, both and neither. There's no any concept at all. From the conventional sense, from the conventional perspective, sure, there's grasping at characteristics. That's one of the problems of samsara, right? Is this grasping at characteristics of phenomena as they're truly existing. And then based on that, we make labels. We label this and that based on these characteristics. But that is only conventional. That's only conventional. Ultimately, it's not so. Right? So, once we understand that, then the question that would naturally arise after that would be, okay, so how can we realize that? How can we overcome this confusion? And that's the next stanza. We'll explain that. There's a question. This means specific phenomena are not possible to grasp on. I'm not sure I understand your question. People grasp at specific phenomena. That's the whole problem. They grasp at they grasp at the characteristics of appearing phenomena as they're real, as they're truly existing in that way. That's part of the problem. I'm not sure I understand your question. Okay, if you want to clarify, you can clarify. I continue. So how can we overcome this? How can we overcome this confusion? Right. So that's stanza 26. Stanza 26 says, impermanent and suffering. Okay. Maybe later, another time, you can tell me. You can think about it. Maybe next time you can. Okay. Or you can send me a message separately later and I can answer next time. So stanza 26 says, impermanent and suffering and empty. 3 designations purifying mind. But what refines the mind unto its utmost is the teaching that nothing has any self-nature. So this stanza also very important. Impermanent and suffering and empty. 3 designations purifying mind. But what refines the mind unto its utmost is the teaching that nothing has any self-nature. So, what this is saying here is that in order to overcome this ignorant state, things like impermanence, suffering, and emptiness are taught in order to purify the mind of delusion. I'm not sure if you recognize what these are. What are these 3? So, impermanence, suffering, and emptiness. What are these 3? These 3 are 3 of what we call, the seals of the Dharma, like the 4 seals, right? We have the 4 seals of the Dharma. These 3 are the first 3 of these, the 3 seals. So, which are taught to counter this state of ignorance. So basically that all that is compounded is impermanent. That's the first one. All that is compounded is impermanent. All that is contaminated by dualism is suffering. And there is no self, or phenomena are empty of a self. So these are these 3 that Nagarjuna says here. Impermanent, suffering, and empty. Everything that is compounded is impermanent. Everything that is contaminated by dualism, by duality, by subject and object, and grasping is suffering. Normally the second seal is normally written as all emotions are suffering, or all contaminated emotions are suffering. All contaminated emotions are suffering. So, this contaminated here is the defiled aspect, right? So everything that is defiled is suffering. And what is this defiled? Is this subject-object, this dualism. It's that creates this grasping and aversion. So everything that is contaminated, everything that is defiled by this dualism of subject and object is suffering. Everything. No exceptions. This is not the topic of this teaching, so I will not spend too much time here, but because this would be a teaching in itself, actually. This is so important, actually. So everything that is contaminated by subject and object is suffering. Everything. That's the second seal of the Dharma. And third, empty. Meaning that all phenomena are empty of a self. So there's no self, wouldn't that be understanding? An empty second. Yeah, but, no self. But it doesn't say no self there, it says empty, right? Empty. Impermanent, suffering, and empty. Empty means both. Means empty of self, that there is no self, and empty, there is no self, and that phenomena also are empty of a self. Right? That's what I said. It's both. It's already both here. Empty. This empty means both. Both. Self empty and phenomena also empty of self. It's both. So these three aspects are used to counter ignorance fundamentally, right? Three designations, purifying mind, but next line. Three designations, purifying mind, but what refines the mind to its utmost is the teaching that nothing has self-nature. Yeah, I don't understand your question. Nothing has self-nature. Nothing. What do you mean? Next line? I don't know. Clarify, please. So these aspects are used to counter ignorance. So, however, so what he's saying here, even though we can use these three statements, these 3 points to purify the mind, that which really refine, that which is really the most important, that takes to the most refinement of realization, is the teaching that nothing has self-nature. That's what the last line says, which is basically the teaching on emptiness of self-nature. So this heart of the Buddha mind, this intrinsic luminosity, is reached by clearing the delusion regarding the appearance of true existence. Let me repeat this. So the heart of the Buddha mind, this Buddha nature, is reached through clearing delusion regarding the appearance of true existence. But it does not nullify its own luminous nature. That's the point here. So first turning would do it, no? No self-nature. No, because it's different. Because here it means nothing has self-nature. Everything is empty of self-nature. The self and phenomena. But in the first turning, in what you call the Hinayana teachings, phenomena, they are made of subtle particles that have existence, right? It's different. And the first turning is only about the conventional self of the individual. There is no self of the individual. There is no self of the individual. But the phenomena, they're out there, and they are made of this indivisible particle that exists. It's different. Here he doesn't say that. Here he says that nothing has self-nature. It's emptiness of self and emptiness of phenomena. Okay? Yeah? Right, so here you can understand this point. So we use these three, impermanence, so the first three seals, impermanence, suffering, and empty. So everything compounded is impermanent, everything that is contaminated by dualism is suffering, and all phenomena are empty of self-nature. We use this to purify the mind of these defilements. But what really does it, what really nails it, what really does it, is the final teaching that nothing has self-nature. All phenomena are empty of self-nature. Yeah? Okay, so then we continue. Now there's a branch off here. So we are, this is a very important point. So just going back to the textual outline. As I said, the textual outline of this one is a little bit... so we were on B1.6, which is the explanation of how the Dharmadhatu is empty of defilements and antidotes, right? And now this was kind of an introduction, if you will. But now it goes into more details, and we go into a kind of a subsection of that. So B16 then branches out. So B161, and there's 8 sections here, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 8. Let me double check. I think it's 8. Yeah, 8. So there's 8 sub-points here now. There's 8 sub-points here. So now we are going to go in more detail. So how the Dharmadhatu is empty of defilements and antidotes, but now further detailing that. And there's 8 points, 8 aspects. And to really understand what Nagarjuna is trying to explain here, you really need to get these 8 points together, actually. I will explain them each one, and then in the end there's a summary. But of course, then maybe later you can go back by yourself and read again and try to, in your mind, to see how this kind of fit, because these 8 points sort of, they have to kind of fit together to really, they like make the whole meaning to come out. You have to put these 8 points together. So in brief, to understand how the Dharmadhatu is empty of defilements and antidotes, it will be explained in these several parts, 8 parts, right? So it will start by explaining how the Dharmadhatu abides but is not visible. And again, you might say, but we've talked about that before. But it has a specific place here, which is a little bit different. That's why I say you need to put these into the, how to say, these 8 points need to be put together. So how the Dharmadhatu abides but is not visible, and then what is it that is obscuring it? And again, this might sound like a repetition, but it's not. It's part of this kind of whole explanation. So, because then the next points are, so first, how the Dharmadhatu abides but is not visible. What is it that is obscuring it? And then how is it that we can realize it through wisdom? And then it goes to clarify that by explaining the meaning of what we call the 3 natures: imputed nature, dependent nature, and ultimate nature. And then explaining interdependent arising, and then it puts it all together. Okay, so this is like a whole sort of thing to explain this point. We go one by one. Okay, so the first one, how the Dharmadhatu abides in sentient beings but is not visible. B1611. How the Dharmadhatu abides in sentient beings but is not visible. And again, this might seem like a repeat of some of all these other examples you've seen before, but again, there's a nuance that is different. There's a lot of different aspects because this is such a profound topic, you know, and there's so many different aspects that we can understand or need to understand about this. So, stanza 27, as a child in a pregnant woman's womb is there and yet not visible, and is not yet visible. Likewise, when covered by afflictions, the Dharmadhatu is not visible. So, he's using the example of a child in the womb for this particular case. And there's a reason for this. And it has to do with potential. So the reason of this example is connected with potential. So a woman may be pregnant, having within her womb what will become one day the universal, that's like the classical example, becoming one day the universal king, you know, or ruler, or emperor, you know. And yet, at that time, nobody can see that. Nobody can, you know, the baby that is there, nobody sees an emperor there, or a king. But it's already there. That's sort of the example here. You understand? That's to say that in the same way, this element, the Dharmadhatu, abides within this cocoon of defilements. But it already has this potential to become Buddha or to manifest Buddha. So the point here is to show how something with full qualities, the point here is really to show how these full qualities can abide fully there, but at the same time being invisible or inactive, if you will. Inactive, perhaps, is the best way. He's not really inactive, but he's also not fully manifested. So there were examples before how the Dharmadhatu is not seen, right? But the point here is that even though it's invisible and not active, the qualities or its potential qualities, potential qualifications are already there anyway. That is to say, even though it's there, we do not know it. And we remain trapped in ignorance and suffering. So this is a question that sometimes appears, I think we have this conversation before. People are, but if the Dharmadhatu is already there, if all these qualities are there, then what does it matter what we do? What does it matter? What does it matter if we practice or not practice? What does it matter if we do virtuous things or unvirtuous things? What does it matter if we are nihilists or eternalists? And that's why it matters. It matters because you don't see. It's inactive. It's not manifest. Just like this example of the baby in the womb. It has to come out to manifest its potential, like this. Otherwise, it cannot become the emperor, So even though this stanza seems to repeat some of the kind of the themes that was spoken before, it says a slightly different nuance of what it's trying to say. And it's connected with the next points, the next stanzas that are coming, right? Which is like, we can go to the next. So, 28. This is the second of the 8 points. So, okay, then what is obscuring it? Now we are going into more detail. You can also see this text as like unfolding, like certain themes appear again, but they are like more detailed. They are like going deeper, opening deeper and deeper and deeper. So, okay, so we go back now. What obscures the Dharmadhatu then? So now is more specific here. It says, stanza 28, from thinking I and mine, and from thinking of names and grounds for this, 4 conceptual patterns come to be, due to elements and compounds too. Okay, so now it's being much more specific about what is it that is obscuring the Dharmadhatu. So, in short, it is this ignorance where consciousness is incorrectly conceived as being a self, I. And as a result of that, we feel like this is my body, my feelings, my thoughts, my perceptions. And from this, we start to discriminate and to grasp at things that are other than I. Or we generate aversion, anger, and hatred. So we can analyze and we cling to pleasure and we avoid that which we don't like. So these are the 4 great misconceptions, and from these, like, the 4 great confusions arise. And what are these 4 great confusions? I think he says like this there, right? The 4 conceptual patterns. Yeah. So in the stanza it says the 4 conceptual patterns come to be. So what are these? We think that we have this idea that that which is impermanent is permanent. That's one. We think that those things which are the cause of suffering are pleasure. That's the second one. We grasp to things that lack self-nature as being truly existent. And we conceive of a self where there is no self. It's the 4. So this is a very clear explanation of, more concrete, if you will, of what is obscuring the Dharmadhatu. So these 4 are very important, and we will come back to these 4 later down the text. And these 4 appear a lot in the... There's quite important aspects to understand of these 4. We will come back. It will come back later down in the text. So these are 4 great confusions that sentient beings have. We perceive permanence in general, right? We think houses are permanent, stones are permanent, situations are permanent, we are permanent, I think I explained this many times before. Even though when we think about it, we understand things are changing, but that's not really the direct experience. The direct experience we have of things is permanent. If I look at this, it feels permanent. It looks permanent and solid. And this is just one example of something that actually is harder to see. But even things that are more fluid, we perceive as being permanent. But everything is impermanent. But we don't see it like this. That's one big misconception. Everything is changing all the time. And when we start to understand sometimes that things are changing, we freak out, we panic. There's change. Panic. I need to be careful with the algorithm. There's change. Everything is changing all the time. We perceive everything as permanent, and that's a problem. And the other one is that we project happiness or source of happiness in things which are really the source of suffering. Because as we saw before in the last stanza, everything that is contaminated with dualism, with subject and object, is suffering, all of it. And yet in many things we project happiness. This is the source of happiness. If I have a big job with a lot of money, I'm going to be happy. And then if we really look like, probably not, probably not, or if I get this promotion, I'll be happy. I'm not sure. If I get this new phone, I'll be happy. I'm not sure. Probably more problems. Anyway, you get the point. So, and then the other one, we grasp to things as being truly existing when they have no self-nature. Identity, identity. Big example here, especially today. Grasp very strong identity. Things have no self-nature. Much suffering comes from that. And then we conceive of a self where there is no self. Myself, other self. So all these are the four great confusions that Nagarjuna is talking about here, that everybody experiences. This is obscuring this Buddha nature. All right, so then the third point. Now, we are talking about, so it's obscured, like the baby in the womb. What is it obscuring? What is it covering it? But how is it from its perspective? So from the perspective of wisdom, from the perspective of the Dharmadhatu, how is it? And now to it, because this is an important change now. So stanza 29. The Buddhas do not perceive any characteristics of their aspiration prayers, because the Buddhas are of the nature of self-awareness and have their own permanently pure being. So now he's looking like, okay, so how does it look from the other side, if you will? How does it look from the perspective of pure awareness? How is it that how is it from the side of wisdom that realizes the true nature? So it says, the Buddhas do not perceive any characteristics of their aspiration prayers. I have to explain what that means. Because the Buddhas are of the nature of self-awareness. So now it's saying that, so the Buddhas abide as self-awareness. The pure, empty, luminous mind, the primordial state. They do not perceive any discrimination. They abide in the permanent condition of the pure ground. Or yeah, for now I can say like this. So because they are liberated, because they are free from this discrimination, they are free from the both the imaginary nature and imputed nature. The next stanzas will explain that. So they are liberated from discrimination. They are liberated from the imaginary natures and imputed natures. They abide in primordial wisdom. However, because, as we saw before, the Dharmadhatu has these spontaneous qualities that we spoke about before. These spontaneous qualities, they manifest. These results, what it says here, the results of the inspiration prayers. What does this mean? In other words, it means that benefit arises spontaneously for all sentient beings. It is like the sun, the sunlight, the warmth of the sun. It does not discriminate where it shines, where it warms. The sun is not thinking. The sun is not deciding, oh, I am going to shine more light there and I'm going to shine less light here. I'm going to make more warmth there and less warmth. No, it's equal. Wherever the sun is shining is equal. And there's no deliberation. It is like this. So benefit arises spontaneously for sentient beings because of that reason. However, the way in which these aspirations manifest the way in which these aspirations of benefit manifest for sentient beings, they manifest without any dualism, without any duality of self and other. That's why in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says that bodhisattvas benefit beings, but they do not conceive of self and other. Buddhas do not conceive of any self benefiting any other self, and yet they benefit all sentient beings, right? That's the very famous line in the Diamond Sutra. You can understand it from here, like this. The results of the inspiration prayers, or the meaning, or the intention, or the function of this benefit manifests spontaneously without this duality of, oh, I'm a Buddha, I'm a Buddha, he's a sentient being, I am benefit. No, there's no such thing. There's no such duality. There's no such perception in this way. It is just not spontaneous. So, from the perspective of the bodhisattvas, if we think now a little bit before Buddha, so from the perspective of the bodhisattvas that are on the path, on the stages, first, they realize that they at some point they realize this Dharmadhatu. And the way they realize this Dharmadhatu is as the freedom from defilements, the primordial purity, the purity from defilements. And then, as they continue in their path, then gradually these luminous qualities manifest that naturally benefit. And finally, when there's no defilement at all anymore, also full Buddhahood, then what is left? It's the three kayas. The Dharmakaya, the pure great expanse imbued with qualities, and the Rupakaya, the Sambhogakaya, the Nirmanakaya, manifestations that manifest infinitely, like the rays of the sun. Like the rays of the sun. If you think about it, and the example of the sun is used in some of these texts, like in the Uttara Tantra, it uses this example. Like, the sun's there, the sun's there, right? But it's spontaneously emanating countless infinite light and warmth all around, right? Like this, without any effort, without any deliberation. It's like this. In that sense, we could say like Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya. Okay, I think I should finish soon. I don't have time to go into this. So I'll give a brief overview. So next we are going to talk about, so stanza 30 and 31 are about the okay. So now it has to explain the three natures, because we said before that from the perspective of the Dharmadhatu, from the perspective of the Buddha, they're free of the imaginary nature and the dependent nature. So what are those? What is the image or the imputed nature? Imputed nature, imaginary nature means the same thing. So this imputed nature and this imaginary. So in the third turning of the wheel, we speak of three natures. The imaginary nature, the dependent nature, and the ultimate nature. And that's what's going to be explained in these next verses. It first starts by explaining what is the imputed nature, and then what is the imaginary nature, and finally what is the ultimate nature. And then it puts that together in the context of interdependent arising. This is a more refined explanation, if you will. I'll do the first one. I think we have time for that. So the first one is the imputed nature. Verse 30. It says, just as the horns on rabbits' heads do not exist except in the imagination, phenomena are all precisely like that, merely imagined, having no existence. So in relation to, if we look at the nature of reality, in terms of the three natures, so imputed nature, dependent nature, ultimate nature. So by this, to explain what means this imputed nature, so if these defilements do not really exist, so if the defilements that are obscuring this Buddha nature, if they don't really exist, and the antidotes or the means by which to purify these defilements also are not really existing, how can we understand that then? How can we have this understanding? If we say that defilements don't really exist, the antidotes also don't really exist, so how is this working? That's why it is important to understand these 3 points. So here he starts by explaining the meaning of the imputed nature. So what does that mean? It is very easy to understand. So it is very easy to understand. So the imputed nature is that which is a mere conception, such as the rabbit. So the example that is being used in this verse is the horns of a rabbit. The horns of a rabbit. So we can imagine, we can imagine such a thing. We can imagine horns in a rabbit, right? We can imagine that. But it doesn't exist anywhere. There's no causes for that. It doesn't exist, such thing. We can conceive it, but it doesn't exist. So all the conceptual projections we make about reality, such as, for example, this is a cup, I don't have a cup, this is a cup, or this is a car, this is a house, this is a person. All those conceptions we have is called the imaginary nature or the imputed nature. It only exists as a mere conceptual projection, just like the horns of a rabbit. We can imagine it, we can conceive it, but it is not there. There's no cause for that anywhere. We call that the imaginary nature. So we have this idea, car, this concept, car. That's imaginary nature. It doesn't exist. So in that way, in the context of this teaching, all these things that we call the defilements that obscure the Buddha nature, including the subject I and objects of perception, the self and the objects, also are of this imaginary nature. Okay? Self is a phenomena of this imaginary nature. The objects of perception also are of this imaginary nature. So the important point here to understand, and Nagarjuna says that in the last line, having no existence. So this imaginary nature, phenomena that are of this imaginary nature, are totally illusory and non-existent, like the horns of a rabbit. We can conceive of them, we can have a concept, but they are totally non-existent. I think there was a question. Good one. You are mixing systems. You are mixing systems, and that can be complicated, something to do. But okay, loosely, yeah. Okay, maybe you can say like that. Loosely, you can say like that. But this is kind of mixing systems, because what you're talking about is different view from a different philosophical tenet than what we're talking about here. So it's tricky to mix principles from that come from different views, because they fit into different schemas of looking at reality. Because then what do you do with the ultimate nature, right? Because here we have the imaginary nature, the dependent nature, and the ultimate nature. And now you're making that match there, but now you have one hanging. What are you going to do with that one? Loosely speaking, there's a relation, but it's not an exact matched fully, I would say, perhaps like that. Because in that system that you're talking about, the specifics are considered the ultimate, do you understand? And because they still speak about particles and stuff like that, like the indivisible particles that are part of the specifics, that are causally effective. And here we're talking turning. But dependent, ultimate. Yeah, it's different. Of course it's different. We will see that in the next stanzas. Yeah, it's different. Yeah, it's different. No, it's different. It's different. It's different. It's different. I meant with my question, dependent nature, we can just grasp on the first nature imputed, really, not because as soon as grasp is conceptual. Not really, no. Not really, no. Because, yeah, you're mixing systems too. But that's okay, because I haven't explained this yet. Because last time we talked about, I explained these bases on the specifically, when we studied the specifically characterized phenomena and generally characterized phenomena based on the South Tantrika system. But this is a different way to look at things. different way to look at things. And I can understand the temptation to match the imaginary nature to the generally characterized phenomena and the dependent nature to the specifically characterized phenomena. And there is an overlap. I mean, that's why it's easy to make these. There is some sort of, you know, similarity. In particular, the imaginary nature, more or less. But so I can understand that because there is a kind of overlap. But it's better not to mix because different systems, here this is the third turning view, which we would call the Yogacara view of the three natures, and this different because in the specific, don't forget that in the Sautantrika system, the specifically characterized phenomena, they are causally effective and they are based upon indivisible particle. Okay, and that's not the case here at all with dependent nature. Okay. Why? Why are they different? But we haven't finished. Depend. Yeah. Okay. I get your problem. We will come to that in the next stanzas, okay? And then I explain. Because the imaginary nature is non-existent. And the dependent nature is empty of self-nature, is illusory. The ultimate nature is the fact that those two are illusory. There's no different. There's no same, no different. Okay, but the next stanzas will go into that. The next stanzas will go into dependent nature, ultimate nature, independent arising, and how this gets resolved. Do you understand? But you cannot say something is same or different when imaginary nature is completely non-existent. Dependent nature, it appears, but it's empty of self-nature. It's empty of self-existence. So why would it be different from the ultimate nature, which is just how it is? Abandon the unwholesome. Good. Okay, I have a question from the last session. The roots of virtue are the same as cultivation the wholesome. Yes, cultivating the wholesome. That's correct. And the wholesome, to understand what that means in this context, I think in the Buddha silence I list them. You can understand there. That's explained in the Buddha silence. So what means this wholesome? You find those things in these Buddha nature texts and in like a Sangha's works covered that. Which confusion? Same and different. Yeah, but in regard to that of the natures, just wait for the next teaching, because then we go through all of them: imaginary nature, dependent nature, interdependent arising, ultimate nature, and it starts to see how this gets resolved. Okay, then we go into more detail, but fundamentally, imaginary nature is non-existent. Dependent nature, it appears, but is empty of but it appears, but it's illusory. It appears, but it's illusory. It does not exist. The dependent nature, it appears, but it doesn't. It appears, but it does not exist in the way it appears. So it's illusory. The way it appears is illusory. And the way reality really is, that's the ultimate nature. So there's no conflict. There's no contradiction. You cannot say that the ultimate and the appearing are different or same. They're not the same, because the way it appears, the way dependent nature appears is illusory. So it's not same. But the way that really is, that's the ultimate. Okay, but the text, but we'll elaborate further on that on the next stanzas. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we finish here. Are the terms radiant luminosity, pure potentiality, spontaneous presence, synonymous with Dharmadhatu, or are they qualities? Well, I would say that those three terms, radiant luminosity, I would say that those three terms, for the most part, I would say they're the same. In between them, in relation to each other, those three terms are more talking about the same thing. And that would be I would say, aspect of Buddha nature. I would not say quality, I would say aspect. Okay? The qualities, when we speak about qualities, is like those things that I spoke about. I don't think it was the last session, I think the session before. Remember when I talked about the qualities, that are like the 22 sets of qualities, like the 4 fearlessnesses and the 10 powers and the 18 qualities and so on and so on. That we speak of qualities. That which you're talking about, like spontaneous presence, I would call that aspects. Aspects, probably more correct, of Buddha nature. Yeah. Anything else? Qualities, qualities would manifest from that. Okay. Yeah? Does that make sense? Does that make sense what I just said? Qualities would manifest from that. Yeah? Or the outflow, the outflow of this luminosity, would be the qualities. Yeah? Does that maybe clarify a bit more? I hope. Anything else? Yes, you can say manifest. Yeah, like when we use the word manifests the qualities. Yeah, so the outflow of this luminosity is the qualities. I would say is the qualities. From a conventional perspective, you can say like manifests, like you can say that the light of the rays of the sun manifests warmth, right? You can say the light, the shining of the sun, the rays of the sun manifests warmth. Sure, you can say like this, you can appear like that, but in reality it is warmth. Yeah. So it depends a little bit from which side you're looking, right? Anything else? No, if there's no more questions, then we finish for today. Okay, then. Okay, sure. Will there be a Sunday session? Ah, you mean you'd like to have a Sunday like a conference, like a meet session? Would you like? That's what you're asking. Do you want? Would you like to have that for like 2 questions or something like this? Is that what you're asking? Or if you or asking if it's, or this Sunday? I don't. Do you mean in general or do you mean this Sunday? Ah, okay, okay. No, sure, we can do. We can do. Maybe we can talk about that. Okay, we can talk. Maybe we can talk about that offline on the and discuss that and schedule if you like. We can do. For me, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. Then have a good night, and I see you. Then we continue Tuesday next week.